YouTube fellow community, Beatles fans, random people on the internet, my name is Giggens. We're here today to chat about the Beatles featuring Tony Sheridan in the beginning, released through Polydor Records in May of 1970, literally days before it all ended for the Beatles. I feel like this record was a long time coming in America. It had come out in various forms across Europe over the previous years, and then eventually worked its way to Canada with the Very Together album in 1969, finally getting to America with this record in 1970, for the first time ever collecting all of the German recordings that were done with Bert Kaempfert, because in the early 60s, there was the Green Beatles featuring Tony Sheridan album, there was the Atco album, which I did recently on the channel, and then finally this release, which is loosely based off of the German Beatles first, then the UK got the same album, and then, like I said before, Very Together from Canada in 69, with a really groovy cover that mentions nothing about Tony Sheridan, just the Beatles, so strategic marketing on their part. This was also the last album to come out during the Beatles' lifetime, if you want to call it that, before Let It Be happened. So it must have been exciting for fans to pick this thing up and then only a few days later pick up Let It Be. But what's also really great about this is it's the first album that I can think of that has the Beatles on it with these recordings. Usually it's just like a hand-drawn cover or a written cover, with just the font on it, but to actually have a picture of the Beatles and with Pete Best on the cover, this must have been pretty exciting when this came out. Like I said before in my Atco review, these recordings are gorgeous. They are so beautifully rich, and to hear the Beatles so early on in their career, but so well captured, I mean, Bert Kaempfert deserves a high five for that, because, who'd have thunk that one day this band would blow up? And these things are just like the most amazing snapshot into how the Beatles sounded in 61 and early 62. I mean, how cool is that? This is a gatefold copy. So you've actually got pictures of the Beatles this time. So Polydor somehow got access and went all out with this thing. So we got liner notes from Tony Sheridan on the inside, which is really cool. Pictures of the guys back in the day. Unfortunately, not one with Tony, which is kind of a drag. But it's nice to see actual pictures of them, because these releases up till then didn't have any pictures of the Beatles on them. And then a huge quote from George Harrison on the back. I think what also makes this a better album is that it's just that. It's finally an album. There's no filler. There's no random other bands just padding out 4 songs. Every song on here features the Beatles. And having the original on here with Cry for a Shadow is it's a Lennon Harrison song, which that pairing is very unusual. And it's just so cool to hear, them doing something so original, but so of the times that would have worked on any of their first couple of albums. Ain't She Sweet starts off this record, and like I said before, it's just John full force with this thing. He sounds excited, the band sounds excited. You could just hear in their performances, wow, we're in the studio, we can't mess this up. This is a huge break for us. Let's get in there and show them what we can do. And they nail it. It's exciting, it's energetic. I think Pete does an amazing job on the drums. The rhythm guitars are chuggy, the bass is bouncing. John just sounds so excited the whole way through, which leads to Cry for a Shadow, a really great, jumpy instrumental where you hear the guys shouting and yelling in the background. Again, the riffing on this is fantastic, and Pete's drumming is super fluid. He sounds wonderful on this thing. My biggest takeaway with this song is, how come they never revisited this? This seems like a shoe-in for the first few albums where, most of the world hadn't heard these songs yet, so they could have easily taken that track and just threw it onto an album and had one of those rare Harrison-Lennon compositions on an album, which, of course, never happened, but how cool would that have been? Let's Dance has Tony on lead vocals, this classic cover. It's just fun. There's a rich organ on this thing. The tom drums are pounding away. Just a great rocker. You get My Bonnie on here, which is one of the coolest songs the guys ever did. It's just fast-paced. It rocks along. Their background vocals it's just so cool to hear the Beatles so audibly on this track. And they're all having a great time. And like I said before, this was a song that perked up Brian Epstein's ears and got the attention of him, and then the rest is history. But just a rocking good time. Take Out Some Insurance on Me is a different version than the Atco version. So the Atco version adds on some guitars. So again, I guess the studio band may have done that. And it cuts out some of the audio. So on this version, Tony says, take out some goddamn insurance on me. And I remember hearing it being like, wait, that's different. So Atco took out that naughty word, but this record left it in. So if you want to hear the original version, it's here. If you want the edited version, it's on the Atco album. But I do like that this one has, obviously no extra guitars. It's very bass heavy. The brushes on the drums, I think they stand out more prominently. And Tony shines because he's definitely the center of attention on this track. What I Say, the great Ray Charles, and this version is wonderful. When you hear songs like I Feel Fine, those drums are very inspired by What I Say, and a lot of songs would be throughout the 60s, but hearing Pete do the drums on this song, you just think like, wow, he could have done I Feel Fine. Like, he could have done something similar. Obviously, it wouldn't have been the same intonation, the same degree of skill, and the same hit on the drums that we're accustomed to with Ringo, because they are different drummers and their styles are different, but like, he could have done a competent job for sure. Sweet Georgia Brown opens up side 2, and again, we had that on the Yakko album. Just a fun bopping song, again with references to the Beatles and their hair. Probably the first Beatles shout out of all time. When the Saints come marching in, this version rules. It's so charged up, it's groovy, it's chirpy, great guitar leads, the drums are sprightly, everything about this screams, this, My Bonnie B-side. It works perfectly. Ruby Baby has always been one of my favorite songs of that era, and this version is pretty much spot on. And Tony's voice on this thing just croons. He just sounds so in the pocket and so smooth and so sure of himself, but the background vocals shine. Everybody is just outstanding on this performance. If you hear any handful of songs from this record, check out Ruby Baby. This one's really special. And then you get Why, which is a nice slow romantic ballad, great harmonies, Nobody's Child, kind of an old standard-esque song, if you will, done in a more 50s rocking kind of way. And then Ya Ya ends this album as a live track, which is fascinating. I'm assuming it's a real live track, not like an overdubbed kind of audience thing. Let me show you the record on the red Polydor label. This is not a Robert Ludwig cut. I've read that there is a really nice sounding one that he did. Just like if you're familiar with Led Zeppelin 2, there's the Robert Ludwig cut, which means it's cut hot. And so it sounds really exciting and really vibrant. This album is absolutely essential to your Beatles collection. If you haven't heard this record, do yourself a favor and go back to where it all started. For a long time, this was the only album available on iTunes when you search for the Beatles before their catalog was added, years after iTunes had become established. Like I said before, Burt Camper, who produced these things, did an incredible job at bringing to life these early Beatles. So if you never got to see them in the Cavern Club or up in Hamburg, this is exactly how they would have sounded. And it's phenomenally important to have that captured for historical purposes, because at this point we are talking about history. These recordings are 65 years old at this point, so, or almost 65. They're from a while ago. So it's fascinating that one of the most important bands of all time lucked out, being so young, hitting these studios in Germany and getting the most expertly done recordings of what they were doing on stage at that time. It's amazing. It's just amazing. So for that, 10 out of 10, absolutely. If you want to hear the early young Beatles doing their thing with Tony Sheridan, who has a great voice, and that's something I want to point out too, is that I don't want people to be like, oh, it's the Beatles with somebody else. That's how a lot of bands start. And Tony was great with them. They worked well with each other for the few years that they worked with each other, if it was even that long. So dig into this album, appreciate it for what it is, because you know what came next, and y'all got to start somewhere. So the Beatles in 1960 with Tony Sheridan. Very cool to have this on vinyl. Very cool to have this album cover with Pete on the front. Great letter notes from George in the back. There you go. 10 out of 10. Let me know your thoughts on this record in the comments below. We'll chat about it. But thank you so much for watching. My name is Giggens. Let me know what you think about this record as well. And I'll see you next time. Take care of yourselves. Bye.